Hi, this is Arsh, and with me here is Dhruva. Welcome to the Tech Hub, the podcast for everything technology. And as we are witnessing in today's world, the AR and VR are revolutionizing the IT industry and the technological world. And joining us today for this podcast is Mr. Robert Rinaldi, who is an expert in UI UX design and who has an extensive experience in the IT industry. So, welcome, Robert. Welcome to this podcast,
Thank
and we are glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, before we get into the nitty gritty of the podcast and AR and VR of the world, can you just give us some lines about yourself, introduce yourself for our audience? Just a brief introduction would be fine.
Sure. So I've had the opportunity to work in the innovation space, as it were, for about 23 years. I started my career in computer science and digital software design and architecture, worked through to analytics and large sort of information systems, worked mostly on that. Then I went on to work on communications and communication infrastructure and worked in various industries, including the mining industry and all over the world. And then I got into business and did my master's in business and studied sort of innovation in general. How we work in innovation teams, how we solve problems, how we frame problems, how we create strategy and execute on strategy. And then maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, I really started to focus quite a lot on how we actually not only build user experiences, both digitally and physically, but how we do so in teams, multidisciplinary teams, and how we seek to execute that as a competitive strategy in the world, especially as we start to see enabling technologies and OEM types of features as commodities these days, and a lot of market competition and market forces forcing us to be innovative at faster rates and in more responsive ways within our organizations.
So that's great to hear. Obviously, you have tons of experience not in IT industry, but also, like you said, in marketing and business,
Yeah.
and obviously you have extensive years of experience in this industry.
Yeah.
Now, before we get into AR, VR, and the UX design, I would like to first focus on, or maybe get a glimpse from you to understand a little bit more about AR, VR. So, just for our audience who are not really familiar with this term AR and VR, although this is like the hottest topic in town at the moment, not a lot of people are really familiar with the key differences between the two.
Right.
And especially when it comes to UI UX design,
Yeah.
in that context as well. So if you could just elaborate some key differences for our audience who are not really aware about AR VR that much. So what would be the key differences in your mind between AR and VR?
Yeah, so we're talking about it sort of immersive experiences.
Right.
They're the digital world, as it were. And there's a large range between AR and VR, or sometimes you heard terms like mixed reality or even extended reality. And what do these sort of terms mean? I mean, augmented reality on one side of the spectrum is our ability to take the physical world and overlay a augmented or virtual world, a digital world. So they sort of coexist, right? There's that sort of crossover between the physical dimension and the virtual dimension. And then as you sort of transition more to the other side of the spectrum, on the VR side, we're talking about a completely immersed reality. So the physical world does not exist in our perception of this experience. It's entirely delivered to us through digital means, and often through hardware devices that we wear on our heads that block out the outside world. Not entirely, but they do block out some big parts of it.
So have you had an opportunity so far to try out some of these headsets, especially with the launch of Apple Vision Pro? I think that is a topic or question in everyone's mind. That have you experienced it yet? Have you not experienced it yet? Have you experienced MetaQuest so far or not?
Yeah, so the Oculus for sure. Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah, MetaQuest.
So Oculus definitely a wide range of the existing ones. I have not had the chance to use the Vision Pros just yet, other than sort of second person talking to people who have given me their experiences or finding those online that have published it so far over YouTube or whatever else is the case. But I think Vision Pro is not necessarily unlocking itself any immersive enhancements in terms of experiences, and we'll get into sort of the user experience of it. But I think their promise overall is, I think mostly from an innovation perspective, they're seeking to speak to people that the industry as a whole may not have yet been able to speak to. And that's a challenge that this entire industry as such has, is we can continue to launch technologies, we can continue to speak to those sort of early adopters, but how do we make this en masse? How do we create experiences that can talk to more people? And Apple being a brand that's very well situated to speak to that next sort of concentric ring of adopters. Not the early ones, but maybe sort of the middle stage adopters, as a way to get access to new markets. And that's one roadblock that I think immersive technologies has in this moment in terms of its ability just to grow. And as you say, it's a pervasive topic, sure, but not one that has become mainstream yet. And part of that is because, we don't yet know how to frame and solve problems that can utilize immersive technologies as a enabling sort of technology towards solutions such as those, I guess.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said. I think I got to experience the Oculus headset a couple of weeks ago, and I was truly blown away by how immersive it was. I didn't really realize that it would be so immersive, but it really was. I got a chance to play a few video games. I think that is one of the best use cases so far of these headsets is in video games. But I think with the Apple Vision Pro, like you just said, I think price is a major factor. For it to become like a become a mass adopter, it needs to reach out to a certain level of people and solve problems. I think it's not at that stage yet, like you said, and I think the Apple Vision Pro contributes to that, because although it's a great innovation in some ways, in terms of the headset and the applications it has, but I still feel that it has a long way to go. And just building on that, what do you think are some of the applications or current examples of some applications that really could enhance the user experience of users by using these VR headsets?
Well, I think that if you're talking about Vision Pro versus other manufacturers, again, the idea is that Apple is always trying to put the flag in the ground a little bit ahead, and sort of building a promise or a vision for their customers, right? So it's perceived value, and especially when it comes to price, them always being a high value provider, they're going to unlock that next concentric ring of early adopters. But in terms of mass consumers, and speaking in terms of solutions, a large percentage of users of immersive technology are gamers. And the gaming industry is a very large unto itself, a very large industry. There's a lot of people in that space. And so the transition to immersive experiences, well, that's just a natural transition for gamers, because they've been trying to get immersive experiences. That's just what creates that whole gaming experience, right? The more immersed you are, the more real that game feels. So it's a natural transition there. However, in terms of immersive experiences just in general, how do we get to the mass of people is not going to be through games, because games is a percentage of the market as a whole, but a larger percent of the market are going to be in other industries. And so the types of solutions that are out there for them are going to need to adapt and adjust. And it's not just going to be, is immersive technologies something people want or not want? That's not a decision that people are going to be making. They're going to be making, is this solution helpful for me? Is it innovative, right? Do I desire the outcomes that they're presenting in the way that they're presenting it? And then organizations need to understand, can we deliver this in a feasible way? Can we deliver it in a viable way? Can we create headsets that are affordable, that don't tether me to a device, that I can walk around more freely? So there's industrial design and ergonomics and sort of form and function, right? There's aesthetics and the aesthetical part of that. So there's a lot of factors involved. It's not just the software that runs on these devices. The entire success of immersive technologies like AR and VR is dependent on many things. when you look at it and stand back as a whole. But when you get into the actual, software itself or the types of, if you want, products that are out there, they too also have a lot of room for growth as well, because what we've typically followed is a more game-like approach initially to developing and building these immersive experiences. However, there's a lot of room for UX UI design and the process of design inside of immersive technologies. I would say similar to gaming in a sense, but not really. It diverges in other areas. For example, games use primary and secondary gameplay to sort of define how people interact with those games. Fully immersive experiences don't necessarily follow that type of structure, or at least not when you're talking about things like metaverses, for example, where you can just wander around forever and kind of make your own experience, right? What it's doing is you're basically saying, I want to take the physical world that we experience every day, and our perspective of that is built up for years and years and years of our own experiences, right? Layers and layers of our own filters. And then we want to apply that to an immersive experience. Every person has their own perspective on reality, on real reality, and now we need to actually execute that in a virtual space. Well, that's the job of a UX UI designer, isn't it? And then when you think about immersive technologies and you think about the real world, you think about, well, how do people perceive the real world? And how do we translate that to the immersive space? In the real world, you have senses, you have human senses, and you got 5 of them, if you have all your senses, right? Let's assume you do. Well, when you translate that into the immersive world, you don't have all 5 senses. In fact, at best, you probably have 2.5, right? Likely only 2. Because we have the sense of what we can see, and then we have the sense of hearing. Yeah, and then you got a little bit of touch, not really touch, it's more haptic. So that's why I kind of give it a half in a sense. So if you really only have those 2 senses in the virtual world, and you're trying to create these immersive experiences that excite and motivate people to use these immersive devices and these solutions, well, you're kind of working with one arm behind your back already. And you have to use these 2 senses and sort of embellish them to make up for the other senses that you're not addressing in that sense. Unless you want to create devices that also go up your nose and everything else that you need to account for these other senses, right? So UX UI as a general design methodology is, it needs to be entirely adapted to designing these immersive experiences. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to create any types of experiences, not only on the software side, but including the hardware side, as I've already addressed, right? From form, function, and wearability. If we're going to make it en masse. So am I looking at Apple Vision Pro and saying that's the way that the future is going to look? Well, no. Anybody that sees it that way would not agree. However, you have to kind of plant flags in the ground and try and sort of achieve that. And there's a lot of sort of psychology that goes behind doing that, raising capital and there's a business, strategies involved in doing that. But we're talking about sort of user experience design in this context. And I would say that from a UX UI perspective, we need to be better at framing the problems, the outcomes that we're helping people to achieve, and to more effectively utilize the types of features and approaches that we have to use, the access to the 2 senses that we have to deliver those. So looking at sort of where we are in this moment, we have the ability to create these metaverses where we're walking around forever. Cool in promise. You have some of these ones where you can go in and launch your own shop and sell your own products. Cool in promise. But in terms of execution, not really there. And the way I kind of look at it is almost by industry in a sense, where you say, well, sure, from a customer's perspective, buying goods and services, very interesting, right? From being able to buy virtual property, like NFTs, cool. It's a cool feature. Is it sort of viable or wanted? Don't necessarily believe so in this moment, but it's cool. But when you look at things like, accessibility and being able to allow everybody to be able to experience these things in the same way, if you have dyslexia or you're colorblind, or if you have other types of impairments, we're not really doing a great job at that, are we? And further to that, are we helping in other areas that are not customer focused? Like, are we helping in ways to help design and build better living spaces? Are we helping to provide better healthcare? There's a lot of other areas that we can look at that aren't just consumer focused, with Apple Vision Pro is very much focused on. But there are also other companies out there that are doing mixed reality, like Microsoft, for example, right? So their glasses are offering a mixed reality approach, augmented reality and virtual reality sort of built into one. But again, as you say, that price point is so high, it's priced outside the customer range, more towards the enterprise or consumer customers, which would be going after sort of different sectors and different industries. So I think we're just kind of finding our way, trying to close the loop, but in the end, it all comes down to two things. Can we frame problems effectively so that we can create solutions that people want and need? And can we package that in a feasible way so that it's cost effective and we can deliver this at scale and in business models that are viable in that way? I think we're very far off from that. And specific to desirability, I think there's a lot of work that needs to get done from the UX UI perspective so that we can consistently deliver better experiences when people are actually using these products. There's a lot of work to be done in there by the UX UI field to develop better, best practices and methodologies for designing for these types of things, as we've done in the two-dimensional world. Right. There's a lot of best practices and there's a lot of tools and methodologies in behind building mobile apps and web applications and websites. Lots. We've had a decade or so to do that. Right. We don't have that kind of history in the immersive space. So there's a lot of room for work in there.
Okay, so following on that, like as you mentioned before, we will talk about the roadblocks you mentioned, right? Like what are the roadblocks which come in the way of developing developing of immersive experiences? Like what do designers currently face the challenge as in to build these prototypes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, again, I think they're going to need to be asked or ask the right questions, or at least understand that they're not just dealing with visuals. Sound and audio is at least 50% of that experience, if not more so. So if you only have access to two senses, for example, as a designer, for example, in this moment, have you ever watched a movie with the sound off? And in the inverse, have you ever watched a movie with the video off but the sound on? Which one sounds better? The audio. Right, yeah, because we can interpret things more from what we hear than only from what we can see. And so, if you look at the UX UI field in general right now, what are they really good at? Visuals, not necessarily good at audio in this moment, right? Mm-hmm. So, as I was saying, there's a lot of best practices and methodology to be further developed and sort of curated into those best practices. Now, that being said, there's a lot of great audio designers out there, for sure, 100%. And I've had the chance to work with some, which are awesome. So is it a roadblock? No. Sound design is not a roadblock. Again, there's lots of trained professionals that can do amazing things with sound. And there are a lot of companies that have these people that use them and incorporate them into a larger design lifecycle. But some of the roadblocks that UX UI design has is, how do we now expand out our good best practices and methodologies that we have in 2D design so that we can encapsulate and incorporate some of these deficiencies, especially related to audio and others, by the way, even in immersive space when it comes to visuals. Again, right. 2D is still decisions that you need to make in immersive experiences, but we need to decide when and when not to use them, right? Diegetic UIs or non-diegetic UIs. As soon as you introduce a two-dimensional UI in a virtual world, it's like what's in behind it? Again, it's great to show it, but there's some trade-offs, and we need to establish good best practices there. It also, when you see a 2D screen falling around an immersive experience, you go, oh, I'm in an immersive experience, because that can't happen in reality, right? So again, going towards more diegetic UIs where we're building interfaces into the experience. All of this stuff has to be, built into more pervasive best practices and methodologies. I see that as a not a roadblock, but just a growing pain that we need to
and like apart from the immersive experience like physically, but like few people also undergo motion sickness or nausea, feel nauseous at times.
Yeah.
So like what aspect or what does it impact on the user perspective, like user experience designing, like while building it? So
Yeah.
what could be the suggestions to the UI UX designer who are looking to build?
Well, that's a good question.
They might feel discomfort.
For
So,
sure.
Yes.
And not just for nausea, but also, there's some effects in
Like
terms of,
vertigo or something.
there's vertigo,
Yeah.
but then also being in an immersive experience too long as well is not, like, there's a lot of dangers to being,
And eye constraints and many
I think epilepsy
more,
is another thing that's big.
yes.
I think in every video game you play nowadays, there's a warning at the start of a video game that if you have any seizures or epilepsy, please take care of that, or
Yeah.
keep that in mind, or don't play this game if you have those.
Yeah.
I think if you are wearing those big VR headsets, at the moment these are really bulky, big, heavy,
Yeah.
and you are immersed in that space, cut off from the outside world to certain extent. I think there is that as well, along with vertigo, like Dhruva said, and motion sickness and all the discomforts.
yeah.
So where do you think this could lead to, or what could be designed better? Is it ergonomics of the headset? Is it giving them a short timeout if they have certain sicknesses, or what could be improved on these headsets in your opinion, if you talk about the headsets which are currently present?
It's a really good question, and probably, a multifaceted answer, in the sense that the design, quote unquote, is not just software, it's also hardware. So it's the overall human machine interface experience has multiple factors. The first one being, as you say, ergonomics. From an anatomical perspective, you're right. And it really depends, like, on the person too. If you're a younger person, you would be more susceptible to the weight of these devices, or just the general fit and comfort level. But you would also be more susceptible to nausea or motion sickness as well, because your brain is just developed, and your inner ear is developed to a different stage than, say, adults would be. But even within adults, it's a very personal thing. So you're right. It's always going to be a factor in both the hardware design and the software design of an immersive technology, until our technology gets to a point where we can overcome some of these physical and anatomical impacts, and also address it within the software too. So as you say, there's alerts and warnings. There could be things even baked in to say you've been using this for a certain amount of time, right? In Europe, when it comes to sound, they actually have a lot more stringent rules on audio, for example, right? In terms of how loud somebody can be listening to music over a duration of time. There are sort of laws that you have to follow that are different than other areas of regions of the world. And so we might start to see those types of things coming in from a regulatory or policy perspective that can help with that as well. And often you find that sort of technology or innovation leads, and then you find sort of more external factors like policy or social-based regulations and policies helping in that regard as well. So there's probably many things we can do. And then I think, further to that is also things for accessibility as well, other accessibility issues. A certain percentage of our population has dyslexia, or even larger percentage has levels of color blindness as well. And all of those factors are incredibly important and directly on the shoulders of the design process, for sure. Not necessarily the business models or the other areas of organizations or market leaders that move these types of solutions forward, but in terms of the human-centered design aspect, I would shoulder it entirely, those types of things entirely on that process and those people.
Great. I think, that covers a lot of what we were aiming for today. I think we got real insights as to, I think in general, AR, VR, and I think even for our consumers or the audience watching the video. I think it was really insightful to hear your thoughts about this whole matter. I think where this is going, I think you also touched upon where you could see it going over the next 5 or 10 years. I think that was really insightful as well. So yeah, I think if we were to just sum it up in a couple of lines, the whole AR VR revolution, as you could say, in the ID world, how would you sum it up, or where do you see it going in the next 10 years? Would just quickly like
Like
to
for our viewers who want to dive into it and like just a glimpse of it, like
Yeah, and from a creator's perspective, or from an audience who's sort of experiencing these things.
Creators,
From a
I think.
creator's perspective,
yeah.
I would say that I saw this as anybody would in the time in the early 2000s, where you saw enabling technologies like mobile devices, that allow us to be more quote unquote mobile. That wave was back then the same that it is now. It's still Wild West, and we need to. I think what we've learned, if we're to take what we've learned and apply it here, is to say we need to be better at framing our problems and being able to identify not just technology, but innovation that people would be interested in using. And that can take time. But in order for us to speed up that life cycle, we need to bring multidisciplinary people together better, more effectively, more efficiently, so that we can be better at making decisions, more competitive, so that we can get more viable and sustainable ventures out to market. And that'll create, good market competition and drive innovation, and then the innovation life cycle sort of takes over and over and over it goes, right? And I think if we do that, then we'll get to those types of more widely adopted solutions faster.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I think that's some encouragement for the creators out there. So I think so that would be it. Thank you
so
much
much
for
for
joining
joining
us for
us.
this podcast,
This is great.
and it was great interacting with you and picking your brains on this whole AR VR technology and the future.
Yeah.
And we hope to see you soon again.
Yeah. This was really fun. Thanks for having me. This is a super fun discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, great job.
Thank you once again.
Thank you. So guys, this was the podcast for the future of UI UX in AR and VR. So stay tuned for more such content.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey design enthusiasts, we're excited to announce our video sponsor for today, The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. It's a must-read book if you want to learn the basics of design. You'll learn how great design works and why it matters in everyday life.
We are sure you will love this book and get your copy now. The link is in the description. And stay tuned for the more such content.